Well, good evening. Today we're going to talk about the virtue of justice. Last time we spoke about the virtue of wisdom or prudence, and that is the first cardinal virtue that controls and regulates the other three cardinal virtues. And next comes justice. Now, the virtue of justice concerns giving what is due to another. That's the essence of the virtue of justice. It's regulated by wisdom because if you don't have wisdom, you don't have justice. If you give what is another his due too soon or too late, too much or too little, then you haven't done it. And it's the virtue of prudence or wisdom that regulates that and that keeps justice from being too much or too little. If another way in which prudence or wisdom regulates justice is it keeps the person in touch with reality. If for example, somebody comes to me and says, I'm a man, I was born a man, but I want you to help me to become a woman. Okay, well, if I am wise and prudent, I understand that being born a man is something that person has to accept. That is an unchangeable thing that he has to accept, and whether he accepts it or not is going to determine whether he flourishes or not. So being wise, I will refuse to help him try to turn into a woman because wisdom tells me that's impossible. If I don't have wisdom and I think it is possible, then I'm going to try to help him by trying to help him turn into a woman, which isn't really helping him, and therefore it isn't really justice. It isn't really giving him what he's entitled to. Now, when we say giving to the other what is his due, this is different from giving to the other what he wants. Back in the 1980s, there was a social investigator called Yankelovich. He wrote a book called New Rules. And in it, he pointed this out, that people back in the 80s, and I think still now, were thinking that we're confusing the difference between what I want and what I need. If I want something, that's the same thing as needing it. And you often heard people in those days say, my needs aren't being met. And what they meant was, I'm not getting what I want. And so Yankelovich was saying we need to make a distinction between needs and wants. And people then would often go on to say that if my needs interfere with or contradict your needs, then I have a duty to myself to make sure that my needs predominate. So that is the exact opposite of justice. That's a concern about me, about my rights, about what I am entitled to. And justice is concerned about what is fair for the other, that I should give what I owe to the other. That's justice. But then you could ask, well, where do my rights come from? I'm supposed to honor another person's rights. That's part of justice. Well, if they come from human nature, God created us, he gave us a certain nature, and that nature requires certain things. And I have a right to those things, food, clothing, things like that, for example. Now, people who say there's no such thing as human nature, the existentialists, people, let me see here, people like Sartre, would deny that there is such a thing as human nature. Well, once you do that, you've taken away the basis for having human rights. If I don't have a nature that requires certain things, then I don't have rights. Now, the virtue of justice, or the strength of justice, was treated by Aquinas, dividing it up into three different ways or aspects. One was what a person owes to another person, and that he called commutative justice. Then there was what a person owes to society. He called that legal justice. And then there was what society owes to the person. and that was called distributive justice. Now, the individual justice is what one person owes to another person. That's different from love. Justice starts with the assumption what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. Love says what's mine is yours. So love is different from justice. It goes beyond justice. Now, distributive justice is what society owes to an individual. And Catholic thought avoids two extremes. One is totalitarianism, and that's where society owes the individual nothing. The individual is just a cog in a machine, and his whole purpose is to make sure that society runs smoothly, and he has no rights in himself. The other extreme is individualism, where the individual owes nothing to society. I just seek to maximize my own flourishing, and I don't care about the common good. What the community owes to the individual becomes clear or concretizes itself in what the leader owes to the individual, because the community distributes in terms of what the leader of the community decides, or the leadership. So in our case, our leadership is our Congress, our president, and our court. Those are the three aspects of the leadership of our country, and they determine how the goods of the whole country are distributed to the individual citizens of the country. Now, Aquinas says, in talking about justice, that the good leader needs to have certain characteristics. In other words, there are sub-virtues to the virtue of justice. A good leader is supposed to be concerned about the common good. He's not supposed to be concerned simply about his own good or the good of his party, but he's supposed to be concerned about the common good. When he's making decisions, he is supposed to listen from the people that he's going to be affecting. So he has to be a good listener. He has to be willing to take advice. He has to, and this takes us back to the virtue of wisdom. The wise man knows the difference between what he knows and what he doesn't know. And when he's dealing with something about which he doesn't know, he seeks advice, he seeks counsel. And his decisions, again, are always concerned with the common good. So a leader, then, is quite different from a tyrant. When you apply this to a family, you're talking about the father of the family. He has to make decisions that are not just for his convenience and not just what he would like, but rather he has to make decisions that are for the common good. And frequently that will require him to sacrifice his own convenience. A couple of examples of this. This goes all the way back to the early church in the rule of St. Benedict. St. Benedict says that the abbot, the ruler of the monastery, should hold the place of Christ. That means he acts with the authority of Christ, and he acts as Christ acted. And he says that the abbot, when he has a serious decision to make, should call the entire community together and get their advice. And he explains the reason why I said that the entire community should be called together is because the Lord often reveals to the youngest what is best. So there you see that the abbot is meant to be a father to his community, to listen to the family, and he's not meant to be a tyrant. In the family, this same distributive justice is carried out. The father being the head of the family, then you have the mother who's second in command, and according to St. Paul, her position is to stand behind and support her husband. And that's especially true when the husband has to make a decision that it's going to cost him a sacrifice, that's going to inconvenience him. His wife needs to stand behind him and encourage him to do that. I'm going to go on in the next section, in the next podcast, to talk about how this affects children, and I will see you then. For now, if you liked this video, I would encourage you to click the like down below, and if you'd like to subscribe to it so that you get a notice every time a new one comes up, click the subscribe button over there. So, thank you very much.